They said I'd never notice. They thought I was confused, forgetful, easy to calm with a cup of tea and a pat on the hand. They were wrong. I'm Helen, I'm 72 years old, and this is my justice story from Maine. Before I go on, tell me something in the comments. Where are you watching from? Which city? Which country? I like to imagine the kitchen tables and living rooms I'm visiting when I tell these stories. It was one of those low, gray afternoons that Maine gives you in late October. Sea air sneaking in through a cracked window, a thin rain making the gutters sing, the kind of light that softens the edges of everything. I was making tea, the kettle just beginning to whistle, when an envelope slid out from between the cookbooks on the shelf and dropped onto the counter. I don't know how it ended up there. Maybe it slipped into a magazine, maybe the mail had been stacked too high in the entryway like always. I picked it up because that's what I do. Open the mail, sort the bills into one neat pile, tuck the receipts where I can find them later. When you live alone at my age, these small routines become acts of quiet courage. They are how you tell the world, I am still here, and I still see what's mine. The flap tore with a dry little sound, and the statement opened in my hands like a small, heavy truth. At first, my eyes skimmed the numbers the way anyone's would. Then a block of charges made my mouth go dry. Restaurant bills in cities I have never visited, purchases at stores I didn't recognize, amounts that altogether were far beyond anything I would spend on myself. My fingers tightened around the paper. In the back of my mind, I saw the butter knife in the silver drawer, the worn leather strap of my husband's watch, and the old notebook where I kept the things he told me to guard. Always keep something only you control, he'd written in a shaky hand on a small slip of paper and tucked it into that notebook the year before he died. He'd said it with that crooked half-smile of his, the one that meant he was dead serious but didn't want to scare me. His handwriting was in my pocket. His voice still lived in the corners of this house. I held the bank statement to my chest like a relic, and the warmth I felt wasn't from the tea. The they in this story are my daughter Carla and her husband Dean. I love them. I had cooked for them at that very stove, watched their children do homework at this very table, hemmed pants and mended graduation caps, kept extra casseroles in the freezer just in case. But love does not equal ownership, and dependence does not make betrayal invisible. Looking back, there had been small warning signs. An extra bouquet left in my entryway with an awkward note that didn't match any occasion. The way Carla started insisting on taking my bank card just to fill up the car or pay this one bill, it's easier. Casual comments about fixing things for me that sounded less like protecting and more like moving in. I had noticed those things in a tired, embarrassed way and set them aside, wondering if maybe I was being sensitive. Maybe I had forgotten what I'd agreed to. Maybe I hadn't drawn my lines clearly. I did not shout. I did not pick up the phone and accuse anyone. Instead, I folded the statement and slid it into the leather notebook between my husband's little slip of paper and the page where I kept my passwords. Then I poured the tea, sat by the window, and let the sound of the rain match my breathing. You can be gentle and still be dangerous. That's what I told myself as my hands finally stopped shaking. That evening they came by, like they often did, carrying a casserole, staying just long enough to eat and half watch a television show. Carla laughed at something Dean said in a light way that used to make me laugh too. They put their feet up on my coffee table like they'd always done. The kitchen smelled like garlic and comfort. I was standing just inside the pantry, my hand on the doorframe, when I heard it. She never notices the extras, Dean chuckled, the kind of laugh that rides on top of something mean. 200 here, 300 there. What's she going to do? Carla answered in a voice I knew but didn't like. I just use her card, Dean. It's easier than asking. She wouldn't even know. The spoon in my hand made the tiniest clink against the saucer. For a second, the house felt like it was holding its breath along with me. I could have marched out, waving the statement, screaming the truth across the table. I could have demanded explanations and apologies on the spot. But something older and steadier stepped in. I remembered my husband's note. I thought of the notebook, the butter knife, the little rituals of a life we had built together. I closed the pantry door. That night, I made 2 decisions. The first was private. I opened the leather notebook and, with a hand that had finally stopped trembling, wrote a list. Gather documents, secure passwords, find allies, move quietly. Not instructions for the world, just a roadmap for myself. The second was outward. I set the casserole on the counter. I kissed Carla on the cheek without letting my anger show. I said, "Thank you, that was very thoughtful," in a voice that sounded almost normal. Then I picked up my purse, walked to my car, and drove to the bank. Our branch is small and local, the kind you still find in coastal Maine towns. Brass bell by the teller window, wooden counter worn smooth by decades of elbows. A bulletin board crowded with flyers for church suppers and lost cats. Outside, the sky had that low, heavy look that promises more rain, and the salt air tugged gently at my scarf. Inside, it smelled like coffee and paper. I sat down across from Evelyn. She's a woman in her 40s with calm eyes and capable hands, the kind that have sorted through 1,000 stacks of other people's worries without flinching. She recognized me from my usual visits and gave me a warm, steady smile that said, "I'm listening." "I need you to listen first," I said, "and then I need to make sure that the things I can't do for myself anymore are protected, truly protected. For now, please just hear me." Evelyn listened the way good bank people do. No rushing, no jokes, just respectful attention. I didn't pour out every humiliating detail. I slid copies of the statement across the desk. I told her about the conversation outside the pantry. I pulled out my husband's slip of paper and let her read the shaky line about keeping something only I control. She folded everything together, placed it gently back on the desk between us, and looked up at me with a seriousness I appreciated. Her expression said, "You're not crazy, and you're not alone." Out loud, she said, "We can take steps. Some changes will need paperwork, some might need legal advice, but yes, we can help protect your accounts." I didn't pretend to be an expert, I'm not, so I didn't try to invent my own legal plan. I asked Evelyn to refer me to the right people. I spoke with a financial advisor the bank trusted and with a retired judge a friend at the community center recommended. The judge had that slow, careful way of talking that makes you sit up straighter. He read my papers, leaned back, and said, "You've been prudent, and you have every right to protect yourself." Those words felt like a blessing with a legal stamp on it. After the bank, I walked to the little bakery on the corner and bought myself a plain muffin, still warm from the oven. I sat at the window and watched the town move. Parents juggling strollers, men in work boots arguing about which boat needed repairing next, teenagers in hoodies shoving each other and laughing. I opened the leather notebook again and wrote out a clearer plan. Not a list of commands, but a script for how I would behave, who I would speak to, where I would keep the copies, which accounts would stay, which ones would close, which powers I would revoke. I underlined one word twice: dignity. My husband had always liked that word. He used it like a promise. That night, I did one more thing. I packed a small bag and checked into a modest motel down by the harbor, the kind with a buzzing neon sign and a carpet that smells like old coffee and cleaner. It felt dramatic to leave my own house like that, but the leaving mattered. I wanted to see what would happen when I wasn't there, when the card they were used to quietly using suddenly didn't respond. In that cheap motel room, the rain on the window turned the harbor lights into smeared streaks of gold. I sat on the bed, notebook in my lap, and wrote a single word: observation. Then I turned on the small television for company and let the night pass in its own slow way. I didn't sleep much. Sometimes I smiled, picturing the first decline charge. Other times, the old ache of being disappointed by people you love lay heavy on my chest. I could have called my sister. I didn't, not yet. For the first 24 hours, I wanted only the sound of the rain and my own thoughts. For the next 24, I watched my email like a hawk. The ping started. A declined transaction at a gas station 2 towns over. A denied purchase at a roadside diner. A failed online login attempt. Each notification felt less like revenge and more like proof. The system was doing what I had asked it to do. It was refusing. It was denying. It was protecting what was mine. It felt, in its quiet way, like justice. Then the messages from Carla began. "Mom, where are you? Call me, please. We need to talk." Dean sent one. "Everything okay? You left us worrying." When people are used to pulling from a well whenever they feel like it, they panic when the well runs dry. I let their words sit for a while. I wanted to hear the shape of their concern when it wasn't being rewarded. After 48 hours, I went home. The house looked the same. Same worn rug, same chipped mug by the sink, but the air felt different. I was different. I made myself a cup of tea, letting it steep for exactly as long as my husband used to like, and sat down on the couch where we'd watched 100 storms roll in over the harbor. Then I called Carla and asked her to come by. "Bring Dean," I added. "I'd like to talk with you both." They arrived in that half-casual, half-entitled way people do when they're used to crossing your threshold without really asking. Carla held a bouquet she'd clearly grabbed in a hurry, flowers at 3 different stages of giving up. She smiled the smile she uses when she wants forgiveness without discussing why it's needed. Dean sat a little too close to me, like physical distance was just a minor detail he could erase. "What's going on, Mom?" Carla asked, sounding more curious than worried. I placed the bank statement on the coffee table between us. The refrigerator hummed. Rain tapped steadily at the windows. "I found charges on my account I don't recognize," I said. "I heard you talking in my kitchen. I spoke to the bank, I spoke to a lawyer, and I've made new arrangements." Dean raised his eyebrows, his face doing that little practiced expression that sits halfway between amusement and disbelief. "Arrangements?" he repeated. "What kind of arrangements?" I slid an envelope across the table. Inside were copies of the documents, revocations of any access they might have assumed, updated powers of attorney, fresh account agreements that put everything back into my hands and the hands of people I actually trust. I watched their faces. First came confusion, then a quick flash of anger, and then the scramble, looking for charm, for guilt, for anything that might undo what they were reading. Dean opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, like he couldn't decide whether to be offended or persuasive. Carla went pale. You can't do this," she said, and her voice cracked. "You can try to tell me that," I answered calmly, "but the bank and the law say otherwise. The accounts are in my name. My name is the one that matters here." I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I let the paperwork sit between us and do the loudest talking. After that day, there were attempts. Of course there were. Texts that tried to sound loving but kept circling back to money. Late-night voicemails soaked in tears and half-apologies. A visit from Dean just to talk, which turned quickly into 30 minutes of him explaining that family shouldn't be so transactional now that the transactions were no longer in his favor. I listened when I wanted to. When I didn't, I let the phone ring and ring until it went silent again. My sister called, because that's who she is. "You know how family can be," she said. "You've got to be careful, but you also don't want trouble. What will people think?" I stood in my kitchen and looked out at the gray line of the harbor. I'm less worried about what people will think, I said, and more worried about whether I can sleep at night knowing I've done what's necessary. She sighed the sigh of someone who still lives more for appearances than for peace. That's her road, not mine. The retired judge called too. He'd gone over the documents again. We sat in my sunroom, the gulls arguing over something in the distance, and he said, "You chose the sensible course. You didn't act out of rage. You didn't humiliate them. You simply put your estate back into your own hands, where it belongs." Those words mattered to me, not because I needed permission, but because sometimes, at 72, it's nice to have someone say, "You're not crazy, you're correct." There were gestures after that, a note on the door, a nicer bouquet, a voicemail that began with, "Mom, I'm so sorry," and for once seemed to mean it. Some bridges I let them rebuild, board by careful board. Others I left as they were, damaged, distant, safer that way. You cannot save every relationship without losing yourself entirely. I decided to save myself first. In the months that followed, my world actually widened. I started going to the senior center on Tuesdays. For a long time after my husband died, I let the walls of the house close in a little more each year. The senior center smelled like coffee, wool, and floor wax. There was a bulletin board covered with flyers about blood pressure checks, bingo nights, and flu shots. I volunteered to help fold newsletters. Later, they asked if I'd sit near the entrance on certain days and welcome new faces, show them where the good chairs were, how to make the finicky coffee machine work. It wasn't glamorous. It was exactly enough. Word got around the way it does in small towns. Sometimes someone would shuffle up to me, lean in a little, and ask in a half whisper, "Is it true? Did you really freeze their access?" They were hungry for drama, for scandal, for a revenge story with fireworks. I always answered the same way. I didn't freeze them to punish. I froze what they could reach so I could live. I protected myself. That's all. Quiet justice isn't less than loud justice. It just has a different tempo. When you're older, you have to spend your energy wisely. Screaming is expensive. Boundaries are efficient. Carla and I do speak now, here and there, carefully, like people testing the ice on a winter pond before stepping out. Sometimes she sounds like the girl I raised. Sometimes she sounds like the woman who helped herself to my cards. Real apologies came slowly, in bits, in actions more than words. Dean keeps his distance. That's fine. I welcome the children when they come. They are never the ones to blame. They bring crayons and questions and stories about school, and my living room sounds like it's supposed to sound again. My house feels lighter. There are no more secrets stuffed into drawers I'm afraid to open. The leather notebook sits on the shelf where my husband's watch used to rest. Every now and then I take it down, smooth my fingers over his handwriting, and read the lines about keeping something only I control, keeping my hand on the wheel. There were, and still are, boring, practical things to keep up with. Forms, signatures, appointments, waiting on hold. None of that is glamorous, but none of it is impossible either. There is a specific kind of dignity in taking care of what's yours, slowly, steadily, without apology. I won't lie and say it doesn't hurt anymore. Some nights, when the harbor is quiet and the house creaks, I think about what might have happened if I'd kept pretending not to notice. I feel the sting of what my own daughter said in my kitchen. Those nights come. They also go. The stitches hold. This story is not a legal guide. I'm not here to tell you which forms to file. Every life is a different knot, tied in different ways. What I can offer you is this: the story of a woman who decided she would not go quietly into confusion just because other people found that convenient. If some part of this sounds uncomfortably familiar, if you're listening from your own armchair in your own quiet house and thinking, that could be me, please talk to someone you trust. A bank officer, a lawyer, a social worker, a sensible friend. Don't let fear of making a scene talk you out of protecting yourself. And if you're younger, watching this because you love an older parent or grandparent, let this be a reminder. Helping them is not the same as taking over. Respect is not optional. Sometimes at night, I picture my husband in his favorite chair, ankles crossed, smiling softly while he pretended to read the paper. He used to say, half joking, "You'll never be helpless as long as you keep your head, Helen." When I think about everything that's happened, about the accounts I froze and the lines I finally drew, I like to imagine him nodding and saying, "There you go, that's my girl." If this story touched something in you, I'd like you to do 3 things for me. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if you feel comfortable, which part of this hit you hardest. Share this video with someone who might be too afraid to speak up about what's happening in their own home. And if you want to hear more true stories of quiet courage and late-life justice, subscribe to Mature Justice and stay with us. They said I'd never notice. They said an old woman in Maine wouldn't understand what was being done with her money. I noticed. I froze every account they could reach, not to destroy them, but to save myself.